այսօր սիրելի ներկաներ եւ հարգելի հյուր Դիգին Արմինե Yalnizyan։ Հայ օգնության միության Թորոնտոյի Roubina մասնաճյուղի կողմէ գողջունեմ ցեզ գանանց միջազգային օրվա նվիրված այս բացառիկ տոնին։ Իմ անունս Անի Շարապխանյան է եւ ես ու Սալի Սահագյանը պիտի լանք այսօրվա ցեր հանդիսավարները։
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Armine Yalnizyan and distinguished guests. We would like to welcome you to Armenian Relief Society Toronto Roubina Chapter's second annual celebration of International Women's Day. My name is Sally Sahagyan, and Ani and I are excited to be your Masters of Ceremony this afternoon. We are honored to have Ms. Armine Yalnizyan, Senior Economist at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, give the keynote address, after which we will have a brief question and answer period. You will note the cue cards on your tables. Please write all your questions that you have for Ms. Yalnizyan, and our committee members will come and collect them after her keynote address, and we will address the question and answer period. We will then break for a delicious lunch. This afternoon, we're also showcasing the talents of 4 of our local Armenian entrepreneurs. We invite you to approach them during the breaks if you haven't done so already. Take some time to see and experience their talents firsthand. Following the luncheon, we will commence with our fashion show featuring Arevik Simonyan and Must Have Boutique.
Այսօր հաջույք ունենք ունգընտրելու հանրազանոթ դնդեսակետ Դիգին Արմինե Yalnizyanին։ Խոսքին ավարտին հագիրճ հարց ու պատասխանի արիթը պիտի դրվի, որ մե ետ պիտի լա ջաշի սպասարկությունը։ Ինչպես թերևս նկատեցիք, սրահեն դուրս ձևեղված են 4 երդասարդ արվեստագետներու կորձերու ցուցադրություններ։ Այս հոյագապ արդյունքները են մեր դեղական խոստումնալից հայ երդասարտներուն ու կորձադերերուն։ Կքաչալերենք, որ մոդենակ այս կորձերուն, որբեսի մոդեն զանոթանակ իրենց տաղանդներուն։ Ջաշեն ետք պիտի ցուցադրվին նորաձևությունները Արևիկ Սիմոնյանի եւ Must Have Boutique-ի, որոնք կորձադերերն են Թալին Ագոպ եւ Քիմ Ղազելյան։ Ներկա լալով այս ցերնարգին, անկարելի է երկու խոսք չսել գազագերբիչ միության մասին։ Հայ օգնության միությունը հիմնված է Նյու Յորքի մեջ 1910 թվին Հայ Գարմիր խաչ անվան տակ։ Այսօր 26 երկիրներու մեջ կորձող իր միավորներով եւ դասնյակ հազար անդամներով հոմը որպես անգախ, համահայկական, փարեսիրական եւ մարդասիրական միություն գծարայե ամեն ուրեք հասնելով հայ ժողովրդի ուսումնական, ընկերային ու մշակութային գարիքներուն։ Ինչպես անցյալին, այսօր եւս հոմը գշարունակե իր գրթական, դաստիարակչական ու մշակութային ծրագիրները կորձացրել մանկաբարձներով, ամառնային ճամփարներով, վարժարաններով ու գրթաթոշակներով։ 1970 թվականին ի վեր Հայ օգնության միությունը սերտորեն գործակցի Միացյալ Ազգերու գազագերբության հետ որպես տնտեսական եւ ընկերային հանձնաժողովի անդամ։ Նաեւ գործակցի միջազգային մագարտակով կորձունյա ոչ կառավարական գազագերբություն մնե անգմնա չադակով մարդկային իրավունքներու ընկերային արդարության ու քաղաքագիրտ հասարակության իրականացման աշխարհի դարածքին։
Today's event is hosted by the Armenian Relief Society. The ARS is an independent, non-governmental organization recognized by the United Nations. It seeks to preserve the cultural identity of the Armenian nation and brings humanitarian help when and whenever the need arises to all communities in distress. More locally, the Toronto chapter continually sends financial and volunteer support to the Hospital for Sick Children, local food banks, nursing homes, and long-term care facilities. It has also been noted to have raised the most funds in 2009 for the Canadian Cancer Society's annual Capital Drive. The ARS is a strong advocate for human rights, social justice, and civil society around the world. Over the past century, this international women's organization has contributed to the empowerment of women while supporting their developmental and social needs. The Toronto Roubina Chapter International Women's Day Committee would like to dedicate this event to all the women who have continued to tirelessly work and support the ARS mission. International Women's Day is celebrated annually on March 8th as a day of acknowledgement and giving homage to the economic, political, and social achievements of women in the past, present, and future. Born at a time of great social turbulence and crisis, International Women's Day inherited a tradition of protest and political activism. In 1910, Clara Zetkin, the leader of the Women's Office for the Social Democratic Party of Germany, proposed the idea of International Women's Day at the International Conference for Working Women in Copenhagen. This year marks the 100th anniversary.
Կանանց միջազգային օրը ամեն տարի մարտ 8-ին կնշվի աշխարհի 4 կողմը։ Հռչակումը ցոնված է այն գիներուն, որոնք աշխարհի բոլոր կողմերը գիներու հարցերու արձարծող հարաճաբահներն են։ Խորհրդային միության քայքայում են ետք, Հայաստանի մեջ գիներու միջազգային օրվան տոնակատարությունը թատրեցավ եւ զայն փոխարինեց ապրիլ 7-ը որպես գեղեցկության եւ մայրության pedagogan տոն։ Սակայն ժողովուրդը շարունակեց նշել նաև մարտ 8-ը։ Այս երկու գիներու օրերու նյութին մասին հանրության հետ մտկերու փոխանակումը ունենալ է ետք Հայաստանի մեջ մարտ 8-ին մինչև ապրիլ 7-ը ժամանակաշրջանը ճանաչվեցավ որպես գիներու ամիս։ Այս տոնը կորձակցության միջոց եղած է գիներու իրավունքները պաշտպանելու եւ ճանաչնալու անոնց տարած ծանր աշխատանքը։ Այս շարժումին հետևանքով Կանադայի մեջ գիները ստացան քվեարկելու իրավունքը 1918-ին, իսկ այս տարի կնշենք կանանց միջազգային օրվա 100-ամյակը։ Այսօրվա մեր փանախոսը Armine Yalnizyan, ավակ տնտեսագետ է Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives կազմակերպության մեջ։ 1980-ական թվականներեն մինչև այսօր անկրած է բանվորական շուկաներու բյուջեական քաղաքականությանց եւ ընկերային ղարքադրման մեջ փոփոխություններու մասին։ 1998-ին ան հեղինակած է The Growing Gap, որ կնկատվի Կանադայի մեջ եկամուտի անհավասարության մասին կարևոր աշխատություննա։ 2002-ին ան առաջին բարգեւադրվողն էր Atkinson Foundation Award for Economic Justice մրցանակին եւ 2003-ին ան ստացավ Morley Gunderson մրցանակը Թորոնտոյի համալսարանեն։ 2006-ին ան եղավ Director of Research for the Community Social Planning Council of Toronto։ Իսկ իր երկրորդ քրքեն The Rich and the Rest of Us հրադարագութենեն ետք 2008-ին ան միացավ Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives կազմակերպության։
Every year, International Women's Day organizations, governments, and women's groups around the world choose different themes that reflect global and local gender issues. In Canada, the theme for International Women's Day 2011 is Education, Training Science, and Technology. One should also note continuous themes such as strong leadership, strong women, strong world. Our keynote speaker for today, Ms. Armine Yalnizyan, encompasses these attributes. Ms. Yalnizyan is Senior Economist at the Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives, having joined in 2008 to advance the work of the Growing Gap Project. A long-time research associate, she has participated in the alternative federal budget since its launch in 1994. She has tracked trends in labor markets, income distribution, government budgets, and access to services, particularly training and healthcare, for over 20 years. She has taught at York University and worked with international and domestic NGOs to advance economic justice for all. She chaired the Employment and Economy Committee of the National Action Committee on the Status of Women in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and fought for recognition of gender issues in the pursuit of equality. Ms. Yalnizyan was honored as the first Atkinson Foundation Economic Justice Fellow in 2002 and received the Morley Gunderson Prize in 2003 from the University of Toronto, where she obtained her MA in Industrial Relations. She serves on the boards of Institute of Population and Public Health, the Public Interest Advocacy Centre, and the Canadian Association of Business Economics. She also sits on the Research Advisory Committee of Social Planning Toronto, where she was Program Director from 1987 to 1997 and Director of Research in 2006 and 2007. Ms. Yalnizyan's heritage has formed her life and her career choices. As a Hayachchik and a child of parents whose fathers were slaughtered in the Armenian genocide, she has been taught we must use our strength to build a better world and leave no one behind. Now please join me in welcoming Ms. Armine Yalnizyan.
Parev Yev Asuparev for all of you, Sireli oh my God. Shadurachem Hosallalai Sor Hedernit. So my God. Amenis Batmutun Moning Kondor Hosegadzen Kas Yergirin Yep Aserontin Match. Ինչպես եգանքոս և ինչպես գուզենք որ մեր հայությունը պաշտպանենք և արժևորենք։ Ես հոստնած եմ հայերենս քունլեսուս է, բայց կտեսնաս կոր, որ դգարացած է հայերենս։ Չունիմ եղբայր, չունիմ քույր, մայրս կրեթե 17 տարի մեռած է, հայրս մեռած է կրեթե 47 տարի։ Ուրիշ ընտանիք չունիմ և ուրիշ ընտանիք չեմ մնացած ուրիշ դեղ աշխարհին վրան. So as an only child, I am like many Armenians of my age bound to other Armenians, not by my family, but by the cultural ties to other Armenians. My family was unusually small. And with the death of my parents, my cultural bonds are weaker than they used to be. Not unlike others of my own age, my life is increasingly taken up by work. The remaining precious time is focused on immediate family and close friends. And time for cultural links is harder to find, it seems. This, too, is not an uncommon story. This is an amazingly full room, and very full of very beautiful women. But we are a small group of Engeruiner. Census information tells us there are 50,000 Armenians in this country, slightly more than half of whom are women. That makes 25,000 potential Engerui. 92% of us are Canadian citizens, but only 40% of us were born here. Less than half of all Armenians, that's 47%, speak Armenian at home. 5 years earlier, slightly more than half of Armenians spoke Armenian at home, 51%. I have no doubt that this is because we are all getting so much more engaged in an ever more interlinked world. Things that grip our attention and beg our involvement are rarely simply one of cultural identity these days. And more on that in a moment. But just before I go on, I want to say we will never know from now on how many Armenians there are, what language we speak, or what happens to us because of the decision on the census. And I would urge you to work with me to urge our government to change its mind, and if not this government, another. Like all of you, I was encouraged by my parents to get the best education possible and go out there and make a difference. It was expected we would do everything our parents did and more. Most importantly, to be courageous, to be tough, and to be fair-minded. My choice of field is unusual for an Armenian woman. In fact, it's unusual for any woman. But my dedication and attempt to honor our past and build our future is not unusual. I took up economics to advance the pursuit of social justice, not to make money. That is directly because of the influence of my heritage and my faith, two things that have always been deeply intertwined in the Armenian experience. Many of you have dedicated your lives to building the community here and in Armenia. I applaud you, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the opportunities you provide Armenian children all over the world to learn our culture through language and history. Your work is also critical for many women trying to raise their families in Armenia and elsewhere with little support. Last year, you celebrated the 100th anniversary of ARS. This year, we celebrate the beginning of the next 100 years of ARS, the second mile. This year also represents, as our speakers have said, the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. Where will this second century of working together take us? Being Armenian means being acutely aware of our history and perhaps unusually sensitive to the meaning of history. In preparation for this afternoon, I looked at the origins of both International Women's Day and the Armenian Relief Society. Both started about 100 years ago. Both International Women's Day and the Armenian Relief Society were born from a revolutionary spirit that gripped the world in those times. Both the International Women's Day and the Armenian Relief Society sought to confirm women as equals, brought together women seeking relief for themselves and for the ones they love everywhere, and defined security as economic, social, and political security. And the wellspring of both of these movements? Turbulent times, insecure times, times of huge growth, industrialization, robber barons, the movement from country to city in every nation that was developing, great exploitation, crushing poverty, powerful leaders wanting even more power. The scent of war and massacre was in the air, and a ruthless spirit. Perhaps you are uncomfortable by my describing it this way, and perhaps you are uncomfortable with my characterizing our early days as revolutionary, but may I bring to your attention that the Armenian Relief Society originally was founded in the US in 1910 as the Armenian Revolutionary Federation Red Cross. It changed its name only in 1946 to the Armenian Relief Society when the spirit of revolution was perhaps not as appropriate. Its originating purpose, the purpose of this organization, was not to promote our culture. Its originating purpose was to serve the humanitarian needs of all communities that may require emergency aid, regardless of ethnic origin or religious affiliation. That was indeed a revolutionary idea at the time, a revolutionary idea that was sweeping the world after centuries of struggle to define territory, define nation states, define identity, consolidate power. Only after the massacre was the purpose extended to preserve the cultural identity of the Armenian people worldwide. Origins of the International Women's Day was similarly revolutionary. It sprang, as was mentioned, from the Second International in Copenhagen in 1910. The Second International was the Second International Assembly of a nascent labor movement that had sprung out of the process of rapid worldwide industrialization and economic expansion at the turn of the 20th century. It organized itself, why? To bear witness and to protest against deteriorating working conditions, even as economies surged and unprecedented wealth was being created. The idea of an International Women's Day was put forward at this meeting of the Second International in 1910. But the first International Women's Day was not observed until March 19th, 1911, by over 1 million people in Austria, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland. History has it that Russian women were the first to speak out in 1910 at the Assembly and start to demand better conditions for all, particularly working women, just like the culotte rouge gave rise to the French Revolution. As Margaret Thatcher would say, if you want something said, ask a man, but if you want something done, ask a woman. The demonstrations that marked International Women's Day in Russia proved to be the first stage of the Russian Revolution. Revolutionary spirit, indeed. They weren't accepting not good enough. The notion of celebrating an International Women's Day expanded to the West only in 1975, designated by the United Nations as the International Women's Year. International Women's Day was first observed as a popular global event after 1977, when the United Nations General Assembly invited member states to proclaim March the 8th as the UN Day for Women's Rights and international peace. Well, it took us another 20 years of organizing as women, but in Beijing, in 1995, 180 governments signed onto a global pledge, a commitment to improve equality and living conditions for women everywhere. By that time, women had done an awful lot for themselves, changing the daily reality of women's lives. Women's education had improved dramatically all over the world. More women that were working than ever before in history. Participation rates in the paid labor force had soared. Fertility rates had dropped like a stone. Women are marrying later, having fewer children, and a job is just as likely to be the main focus of a woman today as for most men, particularly the next generation. This, my friends, is a social revolution in what the meaning of women are. But in Canada and elsewhere, there was no policy response to the changing meaning of our daily lives. Women are still likely to be poorer than men. Women are still likely to face more violence than men. Women are still paid less than men, even when equivalently qualified, and that is as true here as it is elsewhere. For sure, there have been improvements in the economic outcomes for women. More economic independence, greater purchasing power. But whatever progress has been made on our own steam, not because of the support of public policy. Because we are more educated and because we are spending simply more time working for somebody else in the paid labor market. Despite this, it now takes our families 2 people to get and stay in the middle. And despite this, family incomes of those in the middle are no higher than they were 30 years ago, when fewer households had 2 people working full-time and fewer people had post-secondary degrees and training. As the incomes of the middle have stagnated 2 brutal recessions in Canada at the beginning of the 1980s and again at the beginning of the 1990s, knocked the stuffing out of the incomes of those at the bottom of the income distribution. The poor indeed did get poorer, much poorer than their counterparts a generation ago after controlling for inflation. Meanwhile, the costs of housing and education, the 2 biggest investments any one of us in this room or anywhere will ever make, soared at many multiples of the increase in incomes for most people. I said there's been a social revolution in women's and families' lives, but no policy response. That's not quite true. The same year that the federal government signed the commitment to equality in China, it delivered Budget 1995. That budget scaled back social provisions to health, to post-secondary education, to home care, to child care, to counseling, to social welfare, to affordable housing, to unemployment insurance, to shelters for women, to training for women and men. It also cut back on transfers to the provinces everywhere. Many provinces passed on the favor by cascading responsibilities to municipalities, downloading responsibilities but not the money, passing the bucks but not the buck, which meant more responsibilities but less money for physical infrastructure in our communities. So we find ourselves raising money for schools and struggling to keep public rinks and pools and libraries open, though our economy is 5 times as large as that time when those rinks and pools and libraries were built. Somehow our parents' generation found the money to build this for everybody. We're having trouble keeping these places open. So massive were these cuts at the federal level and subsequently at the provincial level that budgets were balanced years before schedule. Ironically, just after the government declared a commitment to equality, inequality galloped ahead. Both incomes and access to community resources were scaled back by the mid-1990s, but even when the economy started to grow at rates not seen since the 1960s, no resources could be found for women's issues. By the late 1990s, after the deficit was wrestled to the ground, emerging economies and global trade started developing a powerful economic cycle that created more wealth and more jobs in Canada. But so too did the new phenomenon related to growth start to spring up. Inequality always widens during a recession because the poor lose jobs and they lose ground. For the first time, however, in our history, inequality has widened during a cycle of strong growth. In fact, inequality hasn't grown at this pace ever before on record. And it is not because the bottom of the income distribution was losing ground or losing income, but because of the speed with which the income gains at the top occurred during this period of expansion. The top 1% of Canadians took 1/3 of all income gains generated in the past decade. Do you think that's normal? The last time that the Canadian economy grew at a similar rapid pace of expansion, in the 1960s, those in the top 1% of Canadian society took only 8% of all the growth. We've seen nothing like this since the 1920s. The days of robber barons and ruthless entrepreneurs, except now the entrepreneurs work and provide jobs in China, and the most ruthless decision makers are on Wall Street and Bay Street. Then, just as our economy rose from a couple of decades of brutal recession and budgets began to produce surpluses, governments at every level and from every political stripe started cutting taxes. Over $120 billion in tax cuts occurred between the years 2000 and 2005. Over $220 billion in tax cuts have emerged since 2006. Do you remember what you did with your tax cut? It turns out that the tax cut agenda does least for women. It most benefits those with the highest income, those over $100,000, most of whom are men. For every single woman in this category, there are 3 men. Less than 5% of the population, you might be interested to know, have this much income. In fact, 38% of women in Canada, at the latest stats, are non-taxable. Their incomes are so low. Only 26% of men fall in that category. So, the tax cut agenda, which has been the priority in public policy for over a decade, does not even reach 4 in 10 women. In fact, women have lost ground even though the economy has grown, because women benefit most from the services those taxes buy. Now we are working harder to help make our families' ends meet, and now we are working harder to provide the unpaid labor to help replace the community services that have been cut, like care for the aged, care for the ill, that get released out of hospital so quickly. For women, regardless of how good the cause has been, the cupboard has been bare in good times and bad. And what has our response been? Well, we keep just getting educated in more record numbers. Now the number of graduates coming out of post-secondary education is the majority of whom are women. And we keep getting jobs and working longer hours. The average family in Canada raising children works 200 hours more a year now than it did a decade ago. That's primarily because of the amount of work women have put in. Last year, as if our personal efforts could push back a wave of reform that has affected everybody's fortunes. It's not about you. It's about us. Last year, on the occasion of the 210th International Women's Day, the International Committee of the Red Cross, basically where we started off with ours, tried to focus the world's attention on the hardship that displaced women endure. Now, the pain and displacement of the populations is a very familiar story to all of us in this room, to all of the Ngerui. Indeed, it was central to the work of ARS, which in its origins was an extension of the Red Cross. And I'm not going to tell you that a lot of progress hasn't been made in the last 100 years. Without doubt it has been. But as history repeats itself, another century of work is required. If we are to go on to the second mile, we are going to need to summon that revolutionary spirit. And indeed, in these days, it is all around us. It's the revolutionary spirit that drew out our Ngerui in Iran, who were the face of the Green Revolution. It was the revolutionary spirit that saw mothers kissing soldiers in the streets of Cairo. It was the veiled women in Tunisia organizing security, shelter, and communications for all the protesters. The women of Benghazi who painted their children and the walls with the colorful slogans of the new revolution. We are watching as the world is swept by a wave of revolutionary spirit. Protests seeking democracy are igniting across the Middle East, and protests trying to protect democratic rights are jumping up in the US. The children of union workers in the US who are just starting to wake up to the realization that their middle-class way of life came into being because people got organized and negotiated something better for themselves together. Women are not merely joining the protests to topple dictators around the world and protest injustice. They are at the center of demanding change, as they did 100 years ago. The ARS motto is Jorovutin Hed, Jorovutin Hamar, with the people, for the people. How revolutionary is that? Charity is important. Our history and our faith calls us to lend a helping hand. But our challenge is far bigger than filling the holes that somebody else is blowing up. The lyrics of a common hymn may well define our mission together. give bread to all those who are hungry, and hunger for justice to all those who are fed. 2011 represents the beginning of the second century of our work, our second mile. And I say our because I have to tell you, being invited to speak to this session and learning about ours makes me want to join. (2011) 2011 represents the beginning of this second century of work and our second mile together. The work of ARS and all similar organizations is grounded in the pursuit of security and opportunity, peace and understanding. None can be achieved without a measure of economic and social justice. These are sacred concepts, and so is the idea of the second mile. It comes from the Bible. It is part of Jesus' parable about turning the other cheek, just another analogy to help guide our actions and our spirit. The gospel has it that Jesus told his followers, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the second mile. So let me put this into a bit of context. The Roman Empire regularly abused the peasants of the empire through unjust rules and heavy-handed soldiers. It included the practice of Angaria, in which civilians could be forced by the soldiers to carry the soldiers' equipment for the distance of 1 Roman mile. Now, this was quite an onerous task in the day because the soldier's pack could easily weigh 100 pounds or more. The Angaria was then a sort of forced labor tax on the population, which enabled the military to travel around the empire more easily. In this case, the obligation is very clear. It is to go a mile, 1,000 paces, 2,000 ordinary steps. Anybody can count them off. It would not be so easy for the soldier to force or trick you into a second mile. And Jesus suggests going the second mile. Now, why is that? By choice? Like turning the other cheek, it is an act of defiance. It is a way of saying to the abuser, strike me if you will, but you have no real power over me. You cannot appropriate all the strength I have. There's more where that came from. As our Engerui are showing us across the Middle East, even though stepping out in faithful defiance against the oppressor is fraught with danger, maybe even death, faithful defiance also brings a profound measure of vitality and joy. In fact, the spirit of faithful defiance is what lies behind the second mile and the key to abundant life, which is the promise of Scripture. So today, I'm asking you, my Engerui, go with me the second mile. Go beyond the expected norm. Go beyond your call of duty, beyond the everyday routines of our lives. Go towards the essential, the life-giving. Let us work together to improve women's lives at home and abroad, and by so doing, improving the lives of everyone in our communities and tied to our communities. Thank God for ARS, and as we set out on the second century of this work, let us be guided by that Spirit who went the second mile for the whole of humanity, setting up the path to abundant life for us all. Thank you.
Address. I can see some teary eyes in the crowd, so thank you very much. At this time, I would ask everyone to just write down their questions, and our committee members will be floating around the hall to collect your questions. At this time, I would also like to invite Ingeruhi Seta Kasabian, chairwoman of this year's ARS International Women's Day Committee, to present Ms. Armine Yalnizyan with a token of our appreciation.
Ուրեմն այժմ կհրավիրենք հոմի կանանց միջազգային օրվա հանձնախումբի ադենաբեդուհի Ընկերուհի Սեթա Քասաբյան, որ Արմինեին բարգեւադրե փոքրիկ նվերովը։ Հրամեցեք Ընկերուհի Սեթա։ There's these stairs.
I know.
Do you want to read it?
On behalf of the Armenian Relief Society Roubina chapter of Toronto and the Committee for International Women's Day, I would like to express our sincerest appreciation to Ms. Yalnizyan for so graciously accepting the role of guest speaker on this important day. Thank you, Armine, for honoring us with your presence and for enlightening us about the issues of the day, especially ones that affect women. Please accept these small gifts as a token of our appreciation. This silk scarf from Armenia was made specially for you by Armine Tumanyan. She shares a name with you. And it features the pomegranate, which symbolizes longevity and prosperity, which we wish you.
Thank you.
And we have some books here from Canadian Armenian artists for you to have and look and for your pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Not to take away from our eloquent speaker, MCs, I would like to take this opportunity to thank each and every member of the committee for their tireless work, and especially my co-chair. I know where she is, but she did a fantastic job. And lastly, you, our guests. Alice Zakarian is my co-chair. She did an amazing job. And lastly, you, our guests. Thank you so very much for supporting us. Seeing these numbers here gives us hope and encourages us to keep on with our mission. Getse Homa.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. I'm doing very good.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll start off with the first question. You've spoken about wage inequality, which continues to prevail in Canada. What steps can we, as those women, take to abolish this unfair treatment?
Do you want to give me a couple of other questions?
Do you want me to give you a few and then you can
Yes,
address them? Okay, sure. You have the next one. Go ahead.
Okay, from your experience, how does a woman balance effectively family and career?
What is your next project? What are you working on currently? Okay. So I'm going to try to read this one. Sorry if I don't do it any justice. We are roughly 50% of the population. We are all well educated. So how come we cannot influence government policy to our advantage?
Okay, that's good.
And that's
good. And we'll do that.
And then we have one that says, are you thinking about joining politics?
And is that
Sorry.
it? Wow.
Okay, we have a lengthy one. Okay, one more. We'll take one more.
Okay, so besides letters of petition, it seems we are reluctant to be bothered to take a revolutionary step here in Canada, North America. How can we, as Canadian Armenian women, take part in the worldwide revolution? How can we remember that we are one with those on the other side of the world? Do you have any suggestions to break up the apathy and ignite the fire?
And these are the questions if you wanted to just go over them.
Thank you. I think. All right, I'm a very linear person. I'm very bad with names and faces. I'm very good with numbers, so I do things very linearly. The first question was about wage inequality. What can we do about it? In fact, we used to have an employment equity legislation as well as having pay equity legislation. I think it is very important to put some kind of legislative backdrop and processes of recourse. These have both been eroded in the last, we got them in the 1980s because we had a strong women's movement. We've lost the women's movement in this country and we've lost our protections and our sources of recourse. Women have done absolutely everything they could to have equal wages for equal work, which is to be better educated, participate in professional jobs, and still they get treated by being rewarded at less amounts of pay. So at some point you need recourse to justice and some kind of systemic recourse. And I would strongly suggest that we start thinking about how we could go back to the types of systems that would permit us to have some kind of legal recourse. The question was, how do I recommend balancing family and career? I'm the last person to be asked that question. But I do want to say one thing. I think as fertility rates drop in this country and elsewhere, my generation, choice was all about how do I stop myself from having a baby if I don't want one. The next generation is about how do I have a baby if I want one. And it's because of the work-life balance. And I think we need to have better, I'm all about having childcare. 2/3 of women with children under the age of 6 are now in the labor force. A generation ago, it was 2/3 of women with children under the age of 6 who were staying at home. We need childcare. That said, childcare isn't the only solution, and real choice means being able to choose to stay home as well. We need real choices for young women, and it can't be waiting for mommy to provide the childcare because we're busy working. So, what's the next project I'm working on? Household debt is the issue that I'm really tackling right now. And so you'll be seeing more about that later, though I have been getting a little bit involved in the rise of the temporary guest worker. Everybody in this room is a child of an immigrant. We were all invited here, or we came here as tourists and became citizens. 92% of us are citizens that are Armenian. And now immigration is filling labor market needs without attending to citizenship needs. And this is a completely unacceptable trajectory of Canada, which has been basically the United Nations for the rest of the world. We are how the United Nations would work, peaceably, and we need to make sure that we are doing something better than where we're heading right now in terms of how we meet both our labor market needs and our needs for great citizens as we move forward. We make up 50% of the population, but we can't influence public policy. I don't think we're trying. I actually think we're so busy trying to make ends, I think we're so busy with our own lives and trying to make ends meet that we're not organizing ourselves very well. We've lost the organizational structures that we had in the run-up to the 1990s. Perhaps something will emerge in the next little while, because that is the question of how do you suggest that we become part of a worldwide revolutionary movement? Ladies, and the one or two gentlemen that are here, revolutions happen, they sweep over us. They seem to be sweeping over the world. And I think it is in part a response to unfettered greed, unfettered power, unfettered control. And maybe our time just hasn't come, but I think we should start getting organized just in case it's around the corner, because it's not looking that good. And I can't remember what this question is. Are you thinking about going into politics? Absolutely not. Forgive. I'll take it.
Ուրեմն այս տարի եւս վեհանցնությամբ արադացեն նվիրատվելու պատճառով կազմակերպած ենք վիճակահանություն բազմաթիվ եւ շքեղ նվերներով։ Հասույթը ամբողջ շովին պիտի օժանդակե հոմի բազմաթիվ դաստիարակչական, անգերային եւ մարդասիրական նախաձեռնություններուն։
Կանաչ կարմիր շորերս հագել եմ, խոնջաբողջ հաստրել եմ, կապել եմ, թակ թաքուն տնից փախել եմ, եկել եմ ձեր տան դիմաց կանգնել եմ, կանաչ կարմիր շորերս հագել եմ, խոնջաբող չաստրել եմ կապել եմ, թաքուն տնից փախել եմ, եկել եմ ձեր տան դիմաց կանգնել եմ, գիշերոց երեք մի խաբար բերեք, ինձանից յարիս մի բարև տարեք, ասեք դուրս կա են դռնից, խոսք է տվել թող Գարստանի ինձ, գիշերոց երեք մի խաբար բերեք, ինձանից յարիս մի բարև տարեք, ասեք դուրս կա են դռնից, խոսք է տվել թող Գարստանի ինձ. Երկար ծամերս ուսել կապել եմ, աչքերս էլ սուրմայով ներկել եմ, քո խոսքերին հավատացել եմ, եկել եմ ձեր տան դիմաց կանգնել եմ, գիշերուց երեք մի խաբար բերեք, ինձանից յարիս մի բարև տարեք, ասեք դուրս կա են դռնից, խոսք է տվել թող Գարստանի ինձ, գիշերուց երեք մի խաբար բերեք, ինձանից յարիս մի բարև տարեք, ասեք դուրս կա են դռնից, խոսք է տվել թող Գարստանի ինձ. Բարձրակրուն կոշիկս հագել եմ, նախ շունակերով գոտիս կապել եմ, հազիվ տնից փախել եմ, եկել եմ ձեր տան դիմաց կանգնել եմ, բարձրակրուն կոշիկս հագել եմ.
Then by the next collection we're going to be seeing from a local boutique called Must Have by TK, owned and operated by two female entrepreneurs. Their boutique is like none other and is located in the prestigious Fairmont Royal York Hotel in downtown Toronto. Most of the collection is imported from Italy, France, and Spain. As you will soon see, they dress women from casual wear to evening wear, focusing on superb fit with a European flair. Without further delay, I present to you Must Have by TK.
Վերջ, ավարտվեց մի պատմություն, ու դարձավ հիշողություն, հուշերի անհակ ծովում, սեր դու, չգիտեմ ինչու հանգարց, սերը իմ հանդեպ տածած, համարում ես ավարտված, ինձ ասա, որ սուտ է այս ամենը, խաղեր ընդամենը, ուրիշ ոչինչ, հավատա, որ սերը իմ անմար է, այն լոքես ամար է, վերադարձի, հերուն հերացար, և բարևս մորացար, քեզ համար ես ով եմ, մեր սիրո մեջ ծով եմ, մի ապի ես մի ուսին էլ դու անցար, հերուն հերացար, և բարևս մորացար, քեզ համար ես ով եմ, մեր սիրո մեջ ծով եմ, մի ապի ես մի ուսին էլ դու անցար, վերջ, որոշումդ կայացավ, թողեցիր ու